My pulse pounded heavily in my ears, louder than the wrath of the wind around me. Balmy sweat pooled beneath my clothes from the heat trapped by my insulated coat. Yet, the cold stung at my face, nipped at the narrow strip of my exposed flesh between my hat and face mask. There was a storm on the horizon. It's all anyone back at the compound could talk about for days. Supposed to be one of the worst in weeks. That was a difficult classification system to manage, considering every storm felt the same in Antarctica. Fierce winds, heavy snowfalls, solid chunks of hail like being at the center of a golfing range. The weather was either tolerable or unbearable. There wasn't much ground in between.
"Sonia?"
The commander's voice chirped over the headset, clipped to my shoulder.
"Anything?"
I peered through a pair of binoculars, scouring the stretch of tundra before me. The wind kicked up drifts of snow that swept across the sky, a fine powdery mist like white smoke that, in appearance, seemed benign, possibly even beautiful. But to endure those snowdrifts, to feel the grains of snow upon your flesh, was akin to having a knife's edge graze across your skin. When the polar winds were present, it was best to stay locked inside and wait for them to pass. We unfortunately didn't have much of a choice in that matter. Command had given us orders to venture out into the endless stretch of white desert, hoping we might uncover what happened to the employees of Outpost Delta. For all intents and purposes, we weren't allowed to refuse these orders regardless of weather conditions. In the distance, beyond the drifts, there were a series of small cabins along the sloped terrain. They were stationed from east to west, each about a mile apart, give or take. Retrieving the handset, I held down the PTT button with my thumb. "I'm not seeing any active signs of life, sir. How do you want me to proceed?"
"Hold your position,"
the commander replied.
"We'll be there shortly."
I collapsed the binoculars and clipped them to my belt. Then, out of habit, I slung the bolt-action rifle from my shoulder. It had a pallid, green jungle-like camouflage decal. Didn't make much sense considering the given habitat, but the weapons were provided to us as a safety measure, not as a means of warfare. It was a matter of defense. There was little regard for blending in. I nestled the stock against my shoulder, closed one eye and looked down the scope. Tweaking the sights, Cabin J of Outpost Delta came into view. The windows were dark and concealed by a pair of curtains. The front yard was empty, save for small flecks of black and a frosted-over snowcat. I tried to angle myself for a better view, hoping I might discern what those black flecks were, but the cabin was too far out. The rapid snowdrifts of the approaching storm weren't helping either. Within a few minutes, the sound of distant engines cut through the howl of the wind. I slid the rifle back onto my shoulder and rose from the snow. A fleet of plows approached from the south, 3 of them to be exact, not counting my own, which sat parked about 10 feet away. One of the plows broke from the convoy, heading towards me while the others continued northeast. I waved as they passed, recognizing Benny in one of the trucks, while Ludwig and Javier occupied the other. The plow that approached had Commander Kimball in the driver's seat, while the crew's navigator, Ariana, served as his passenger. I raised my hood and ducked against the wind, retreating to my vehicle. The commander pulled up next to me and opened the driver's side door. He leaned out from the cab, removing his hood and goggles. Commander Kimball was a sturdy, dark-skinned man with a black goatee. He had cold eyes with a sharp gaze, the kind that could cut when they wanted and didn't miss a single thing. Eyes that had seen more hell than earth. "The others and I will head out to the last known coordinates of the Americans," he hollered over the wind. There was a matchstick between his lips. It popped up and down with every word. "Why don't you proceed to Cabin J? According to command, that's where the last active signal came from. See what you can find, and then meet us in the outskirts." I nodded. "What are we walking into, sir?" He snorted. "Wish I could say. All we know is that the American company lost contact with their skeleton crew about 16 hours ago. Depending on what we find, they might airlift the team out here to investigate further. And if we don't find anything, then I guess we'll let them deal with it, won't we? We're here on courtesy, Sonia. It's not our job to take care of them. God knows they probably wouldn't do it for us." Ariana peered at me from the passenger seat, a pale-skinned woman with a soft face and long rust-red hair. "Be sure your transmitter is active in case you get caught in the storm," she said. "And keep a flare gun handy. You never know when the transmitters are going to fail." "Noted," I replied. Stay safe, you two. Make sure Javi and Lut don't do anything stupid. She scoffed. I'm more worried about Benny wanting to blow something up. He's been awfully down lately, and the only thing that ever seems to cheer him up is booze or explosions. The commander growled at the very thought and slammed his door shut. The plow continued across the field. I rounded the front of my snowcat and climbed inside, the heater grown to life as I shifted the knob to full blast. Last thing I wanted was to contract something. During the onboarding process, there had been plenty of horror stories about the dangers of the cold. Hypothermia, pneumonia, flu, and whatever else would try to kill us during our time out here. Personally, my biggest fear was frostbite. They had shown us a slideshow with pictures of blackened limbs, of toenails and fingernails turned a soft shade of blue from poor circulation. Stuff like that gave me nightmares. It was a quick drive to Cabin J of Outpost Delta. I parked along the north side of the building and left the engine running. Before exiting the vehicle, I turned on my windshield wipers and left the heater cranked. Give the cold even an inch and it would take a mile without batting an eye. At the front of the cabin, I found the black spot I'd noticed earlier. Small mounds of snow had concealed some of the area, but there was enough present to distinguish the ashes that remained. I kicked away a small dusting, revealing a flare at the center of the circle, burnt to a crisp. It was then I noticed the hand wrapped around it. Skinless, the bones charred black. Cautiously, I knelt down, wiping more of the snow away. My breath caught in my throat as I uncovered the skeletal remains of a person. Thankfully, there wasn't a smell. I'd encountered plenty of dead animals over the years during hunting trips with my older brother, but the corpse of a person was on a completely different level. Sure, still an animal of some sort, but it doesn't matter. It's difficult to detach yourself from the remains of your own species. You can see a dead skunk or squirrel, and while it might be slightly perturbing, it doesn't compare to the sight of a human corpse. Immediately, you empathize with the body, draw comparisons between yourself and them. Wondered what it would be like if the situation were reversed. If you were the one that had been found like this, scorched beyond recognition, not even enough left for a proper burial. I angled the headset towards my mouth, attempting a level of calm that felt impossible. Commander, this is Sonya. Do you copy? I waited a moment, listening to the wall of static that came in response. Commander, do you copy? Again, nothing. Something was interfering with our communications. My mind instantly blamed the storm. I rose and stood there for a moment, considering my next move. I could ride out and deliver the news to them in person. But I had my orders. I still needed to investigate the building. The last transmission from Outpost Delta had come from Cabin J. While the message couldn't be deciphered due to interference, the call was still received and noted in the American company's records. I looked down at the remains, turned towards the outskirts, and then to the cabin. Son of a bitch. Removing the rifle from my shoulder, I crept towards the cabin with the barrel raised, my finger poised along the length of the weapon. My boots erased any semblance of stealth, and the padded gloves made it difficult to hold the gun, even harder to pull the trigger in a clean, effective manner. Tentatively, I climbed the 3 steps to the front door and placed my left hand on the knob. Inhaling deep, I pushed the door open, thrusting myself into the building before logic could dissuade me. It took mere seconds to search and clear the cabin. Aside from the bathroom, there were no walls to separate the rooms. It was an open layout consisting of a small kitchen, a leisure space, and a workstation jammed into the far corner. Drab carpet and paneled walls, rustic in appearance, but upon closer inspection, no more than a cheap imitation. I closed the door behind me and locked it, setting my rifle against the wall. I sat down at the computer rig, booting up the system. As the monitor came to life, a soft jingle played through the speakers. I didn't recognize the song, but according to a brief display on the monitor, it said, "Don't Be So Serious" by Low Roar. I chuckled, remembering how Javier had once made every console back at our base play Take On Me by that 80s band, Aha, as some stupid joke to keep us entertained, because in a place like this, you have to make your own excitement. It took hours of fiddling around with the systems to deactivate the song. I thought the commander was going to have an aneurysm. Worst part was, even after the speakers had fallen silent, the song was stuck in our heads for days, and whenever it seemed we might be free of it, Someone would start humming the first few notes, restarting the cycle all over again. As punishment, Javier was put on dish duty for almost 2 weeks. This brought a smile to my lips as I clicked around with the mouse. The monitor's home screen appeared, locked. Pasted on the desktop was a sticky note with a list of passwords to access the various systems and programs. Apparently, the employees of Outpost Delta weren't all too concerned about a data breach. Then again, who in their right mind would come all the way out here just to steal useless information about weather patterns and seismic activity? For a few minutes, I desperately scrolled through the computer's files, hoping to find something of worth, but there was nothing notable in the records. I was about to shut down the computer when I noticed a file on the home screen. I double-clicked it and opened a text document last updated about 16 hours prior. The document had been a personal entry from the cabin's primary resident, Emma. She detailed a strange encounter with one of her fellow analysts, Edward. At first, I thought maybe it had been a fictitious account, a short story she had written to help pass the time. But then, I got to the end of the document, read the last few paragraphs. I've emptied the remaining gasoline cans outside my cabin, and I've got a bundle of flares waiting by the door. It seemed to work with Edward. I imagine it'll work with me as well. My brow furrowed, and I read through the final page again. Then, it hit me like a screaming freight train. Hastily, I shut down the system and removed the hard drive for safekeeping. Then, I leapt to my feet and collected my rifle from against the wall and exited the cabin. Rounding the building, I climbed back into my plow and started across the snow towards the outskirts. According to Emma's entry, it wasn't a far ride, but time was against me. The others had most likely arrived, were probably combing the scene, hoping to uncover some indication of what happened to the Outpost employees. I had to stop them before they could. The wind retaliated, brushing snow across the windshield, obscuring my view and distorting the dark landscape. There were a couple of times when I thought the plow might get trapped between the dunes. In those moments, I gripped the steering levers and pushed with all my might, hoping acceleration would grant me freedom, or at the very least, an alternative path to utilize. Eventually, I arrived at the scene, greeted by an assembly of snowcats. There were 2 others partially submerged beneath a fresh coating of snow, frozen over with a thin layer of ice. Their insides were dark and abandoned, relics of a time long lost, it seemed. But realistically, I knew that they were no older than my own. In time, they would become buried by the storm. I parked alongside the commander's plow and stumbled out, my boots failing to catch traction. The environment was fighting me, fighting us all in its own way. Humanity wasn't supposed to be out here. We might have inherited this planet, conquered it to an extent, but Mother Nature had a funny way of asserting dominance, reminding us just how fragile of a species we really are, that without the right conditions, we might have never existed. And while we have prospered, establishing ourselves high on the food chain, the placement itself is a dubious standing, one composed of ignorance and auspicious happenstance. To topple our reign is much easier than any of us realize. Being out here, surrounded by no one and nothing, victim to the harsh weather conditions has shown me just that. Nothing and no one lasts forever, no matter how fortified or prepared. We're all on borrowed time. Ahead, the rest of the team was scattered about. Benny, distinguishable by his orange parka, stood above a crudely dug hole in the ground, peering down with what seemed like intent to descend. Javier, wearing a sea green coat, and Ludwig, donning a dark green jacket, were about 10 feet away, positioned close together as they conversed. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but knowing the 2 of them, it was probably something asinine that would result in laughter. They were good at their jobs, but even better at combating boredom. Closer to me, near the pack of snowcats, was the commander and Ariana. She was showing the commander the GPS, her free hand moving wildly through the air as she talked. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Everyone seemed normal. But still, the idea was already in my mind, permeating my thoughts. The potential danger was very much present. Then, I saw Benny kneeling down, brushing away loose snow from the edge of the hole. He placed a hand for balance and extended his leg inside, digging his boot against the inner wall as if to slide down. Without thinking, I swung the rifle from my shoulder, my hands moving quickly along its length. I angled the barrel towards the sky, leveraged the stock against my side, and pulled the trigger. There was a slight kick, absorbed by the padding of my clothes. Suddenly, I was glad for the insulation. The shot rang across the sky, echoing into the distance. Everyone whipped their heads in my direction. The commander, showing no hesitation, drew the revolver holstered to his hip. The barrel met me with an intimidating steadiness. His time with the British Armed Forces was showing. "Get away from the hole!" I yelled. It was directed primarily at Benny, but a message for all. Benny wavered at the precipice of the trench, already halfway inside. His head turned towards the commander, awaiting further instruction. Commander Kimball, weighing his options, returned the revolver to its holster. "Benny, get out of the damn hole." I sighed with relief and removed the rifle from my side. Lifting and pulling back the bolt handle, I ejected the spent cartridge. Then, I slid the rifle over my shoulder and continued towards the commander. "What the hell are you doing, Sonya?" There was a sharp growl in Kimball's voice, like a father scolding his child. "Trying to get yourself killed?" "Commander," I said, "I found a personal entry from one of the Americans. This area could pose a serious health risk to everyone involved. For all intents and purposes, it's contaminated." Ariana lifted her head. Flecks of ice and snow clung to her goggles. Contaminated by what? With the amount of time we'd been exposed, both to the weather and the contamination, I decided a full-length explanation would be better suited for later, once we were out of the cold, protected against the storm and away from what was beneath the ice. So I said to the commander, "I believe the best steps going forward would be to fill in the hole and head back to base. We should put off the investigation until we can further discuss our options." "What contamination?" Ariana asked again, her irritation apparent. "What are you talking about?" Kimball tucked his face mask away. For a moment, I thought I was going to get chewed out. The commander, stuck with a crew like us, was quite astute at doling out punishments. But then, he said, "You better know what you're talking about, Sonya." He swung his head towards the others. "All right, you heard her. Get in your plows and fill in the hole." Then, he turned to Ariana. "Mark the coordinates on the map." "Will do, Commander," she said, her fingers rapidly pressing buttons on the device. To me, he said, "I'll be wanting an explanation on the way back, yeah? Better be a good one too, or you can guarantee dish duty has your name on it." "Yes, sir," I agreed. "Understood." He retreated for his snowcat, but stopped short, looking around at the others. "What are you waiting for? Spring? Let's go, people. Fill in the hole and return to base. We're burning daylight out here." There was a collective groan from the others, but they carried out their orders without further complaint. Benny, Javier and Ludwig piled snow into the hole, packing it down tight. The commander relinquished his snowcat to Ariana and climbed inside the passenger seat of mine. We rode back in on ease, maneuvering the terrain with caution as the storm ensued around us, bringing down walls of snow and ice that pinged against the metal exterior. It made me nostalgic for my teenage years, when I would spend the summers camping with my older brother in the woods. He'd been a Marine and during his leaves would travel all over the globe. Sometimes he went biking in the mountains or hiking in the desert or playing survivalist in the wilderness. He had been paranoid about apocalyptic scenarios, the kind of person that prepped for the end of the world. Whether it be zombies or nuclear warfare, he liked to be ready for anything. And in a way that only older siblings can, he wanted to pass on these skills to me. Not necessarily because I needed them, but so that I would have them. I can't remember how many times we'd been caught in the middle of a rainstorm or snowstorm with nothing but canvas tents and our wits. Trying to navigate that infernal downpour of hail was no different than those days when we'd have to hike endless miles through the mountains just to find an inkling of society, to find a stable shelter so that we didn't get swallowed by the deluge of mudslides. As we neared the compound, maybe 10 minutes out, the commander muttered, "Foreign entity?" It was only after we'd outpaced the storm that he had started asking questions, and while my concentration was directed at returning to base, I still made an attempt to explain everything I'd read. Of course, it lacked answers and details that he desperately needed if he was going to continue endorsing my thoughts or opinions. "By foreign entity, you mean what exactly?" he asked. I twisted the levers to avoid a shallow crater that would only slow us down in our retreat. "That was unclear, sir. I'm gonna need a little more than that. We've confirmed 2 deaths, and there are 2 more still unaccounted for." "They're not unaccounted, sir. If the entry was correct, one had been exploded. The other was absorbed." "By this foreign entity, you mean?" I nodded. "Sir, did you at all look in the hole?" "No," he confessed. We found the remains, and Ludwig collected samples to identify the body. The hole had been partially filled. It looked like the American skeleton crew was digging for something, so I had Benny, Javier, and Ariana start shoveling it out for further examination. Did they find anything? He shrugged. Nothing as far as I'm aware. They were still chipping through a layer of ice when you arrived. Whatever is beneath the ice should stay there, I told him. From what I've read, it's dangerous. It acts like a disease, a parasite, slowly working its way through the body before dominating the brain. This sounds like rubbish. You realize that, yeah? I have considered this. He laid his head back against the seat. Did you grab a copy of the Americans' files? I have a hard drive. I can show it to you when we get back to base. Great, he said, exasperated. And they told me this job would be easy. I mean, it's gotta be easier than what you're used to. He shot me a severe look then. It wavers, Sonia. Some days are a cakewalk. Then days like this, I almost wish I was still enlisted. If it weren't for all the bullshit from higher ups, I probably wouldn't have resigned. When we finally returned to base, I parked the plow in the shed. The others were still on their way back, chattering over the radio about updates on the storm and the corpse they'd found. Killing the engine, their voices fell silent. The commander and I headed inside, stripping our access gear in the locker room before continuing to his office. The compound, while larger than Outpost Delta's cabins, was most likely constructed on a similar budget. Crude floorboards with sections of ceramic tile in the bathrooms and kitchen. Narrow hallways to the north and south of the building with sleeping quarters, a communication center and medical bay tacked onto them. At the center, perhaps the largest section, was the common room. It was populated by bookshelves, a flat-screen TV that didn't work, a dining area, lounge chairs, 2 couches, an air hockey table in which one of the paddles was missing, and a pool table. There was a second building with a lab where all of the kids worked. But they had all been granted temporary leave for the holidays, while we were to remain and keep the central base active. The buildings were well insulated, possibly the most expensive cost during initial construction if you didn't include our equipment and gear. As a result, if the bases didn't reek of chemicals and cleaners, they usually smelled like last night's dinner. Since it was Ludwig's week for cooking, there was a lingering odor of canola oil and fried meat. We exited the locker room and headed for the northern hallway. At the end of the corridor was the armory, where I disposed of my rifle and ammunition. The commander, as usual, retained his revolver, possibly out of forgetfulness, but more than likely out of habit. Unlike the rest of us, it wasn't unusual for him to keep his firearm, whether it was deemed necessary or not. It may as well have been surgically attached to him. We've got to turn up the ventilation, the commander muttered as we stepped into his office. I can practically taste sausage. I'll make sure it gets done, sir, I said, connecting the hard drive to his computer. While he sat there reading Emma's final document, the others came into the compound, shivering from the cold and complaining. They stamped snow from their boots and removed their coats, putting them on hangers in their lockers. Ludwig took his samples into the medical bay for safekeeping, Javier not far behind, talking about what they should do for the remainder of the night. Ludwig proposed a game of snooker and some drinks to help stave off the cold. This seemed to entice the others, with only Ariana resigning herself to spectate. Unless it was a board game or movie, she didn't care to participate in their antics. I couldn't blame her. Watching them go about their usual activities relieved me though. It was better to have them distracted than panicking, although I imagined the panic would ensue once the commander had finished the document. Once they started to converse amongst themselves about what happened in the outskirts. Until then, I closed the door to the commander's quarters and locked it, taking a seat across the room, patiently waiting for him to finish. The moment arrived when the commander remarked, "Fucking hell." He tapped at the narrow keys to scroll back up to the top of the document. "You think this is real?" "I believe so, sir." I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, reimagining the story's events as they unfolded in my thoughts. "There's enough evidence to support it." He stared at the monitor, his eyes moving across the screen as he reread the first few messages. The matchstick between his teeth bobbed with his flexing jaw. A vein throbbed on his forehead, bulging against the skin. "Aliens," he said in disbelief, almost disgusted. "Give me a fucking break." "Foreign entity," I amended. Not that it sounded much better. "Singular, as far as I'm aware. Infects the mind, takes control of the host." Sounds like absolute rubbish to me. If you really believe that, then why don't we head back out and continue digging? I proposed, hoping the commander wasn't so witless as to accept my bluff. See for ourselves what's actually out there. He scoffed and pushed away from his desk, standing and crossing the room to a cabinet in the back. Don't tempt me, Sonia. I'll send you personally if that's what you want. Sorry, sir. I was just trying to make a point. Point well received. Yeah. He dug through the cabinet and removed a whiskey bottle from his personal stash. He angled the bottle towards me, but I refused with a shake of my head. It's probably best if we don't share food or drinks. We're already breathing the same air, Sonia. We were all there, all exposed. Still, we're not entirely sure how this thing operates, whether it can pass from one host to the next, or if the infection has to come directly from the source. We also don't know the range of exposure. Unscrewing the cap, he took a drink and exhaled. I'd kill for a smoke right now. Pretty sure Ludwig might have some, I offered, which was comical considering his position amongst the team. I don't know if I'd recommend it though. Right, minimizing contact and all that. He raised his hand and rubbed at his bald head. What's our next move then? I'd wondered when this would come about. Furtively, I'd been dreading it ever since the drive back. Way I see it, we have a couple of options. I said, we can tell the American company about the entity, about what happened to their skeleton crew. But we then risk their curiosity, that they might send a team for closer examination. Inquisitive bastards. What else? We can lie and say they died from natural causes. A fickle lie at best, and they'd still send someone to investigate. We're short on time here. Americans want a response sooner rather than later. Not to mention, the rest of their crew will be returning after the holiday, which poses another risk of infection. He drank again, biting against the burn of the whiskey. You know they'd go digging if they found out about it. Can't leave well enough alone, can they? Just have to have an answer. Have to probe and prod and see it for themselves. I suddenly wished I'd taken the commander's offer for a drink, something to help alleviate the tension polluting my body. We should tell them our search was interrupted by the storm, I suggested. That we can resume in the morning once the storm had passed. That'll at least buy us a little time. He took another drink and grimaced. I don't like it, but it's the best we can do for now. Radio command and tell them exactly that. See if the Americans will grant us an extension. But come tomorrow, they'll be wanting answers. Something concrete. And if we don't have it, they'll send a team in. I nodded. And the entity? What do you propose we do about that, sir? Well, for now, it's buried. But there's no saying how much good that'll do us. He set the bottle on his desk and rubbed at his eyes. Christ, we're up against the wall here. He glanced out the nearest window as curtains of snow came down thick. Storm's heavy right now. No going out in that. Tomorrow, we should. Should what, sir? He blinked. How much petrol do we have in storage? A few canisters, I answered. Supposed to get more during our next supply shipment. Right. Well, I say we try to burn the damn thing. Are you sure? He stared at me with a furrowed brow, bemused. Growing sympathetic, are we? You read that document, same as me. This thing, whatever it is, can manipulate our minds. It made someone disappear, made another pop like a balloon, but only after it was provoked. It's dangerous, Sonia. No two ways about it. You know this. Otherwise, you wouldn't have stopped us from digging the damn thing up. I flinched against his harsh inflection. No, I know, sir. I just wanted to make sure you were certain because if we go out there tomorrow with intent to kill, and we fail, that's it for us. And if we sit around waiting for someone else to stumble upon it, we might as well consign ourselves to death. Maybe worse. Imagine what someone could do with a critter like that. He leaned back in his seat and looked up at the ceiling. When I was in the service, we would sometimes find IEDs just in the streets. We didn't bury them and hope nothing would happen. We'd dispose of them proper, no matter the risks. Sorry, sir. I just wanted to consider all angles before we make any decisions. The air between us turned sour. The commander continued drinking from the bottle and chewing on his matchstick, the look in his eyes wishing it was a cigarette instead. Tell me something, Sonia, he said, attempting to help dispel the awkwardness lingering between us. We've been working together almost a year now, yeah? Give or take, sir. Right, give or take. He chuckled to himself. What made you come out here? I paused a moment. sometimes wondering the very same thing while lying in my bed late at night. I guess I needed to get away. Away from what? People? Society? My fingers drummed against the arm of my chair. I spent so much of my life with this plan, you know. Go to school, get good grades, find a stable career, settle down, that sort of thing. But about halfway through university, I realized how much I hated school. My grades, while decent, didn't really mean anything. And that job was just wishful thinking, because no matter where I went or how long I worked there, it never really made me happy. A soft smile crossed his lips. And does being out here make you happy? I shook my head solemnly. Far as I can tell, nothing does. Not really. I just follow routine, get through the days. Don't we all? Sometimes, if I'm being honest, I'm not really sure who I am or what I'm doing. I try to do it their way, tried the 9 to 5 and all that, but I just didn't fit in with the natural ebb and flow of society. Always felt like I was swimming against the current. So when I heard about this job, I figured I'd give it a go, see what happened. Maybe a little time away would sort me out. His eyebrows raised curiously. And I'm still at square one, still have no clue. Life just happens, and I'm there to endure it. Maybe that's why you're so good at following orders. He ruminated over this and scoffed. Could teach the others a thing or two, I imagine. Then, in a softer tone, he said, You're young yet, Sonia. That battle you're fighting, we all do it at some point or another. Me against me, you against you, that sort of thing. But how do you fight an enemy you know nothing about? Boggles the mind, don't it? If the commander would have offered me a drink then, I don't think I would have refused again. But he didn't. Instead, he kept the bottle to himself, cradled in his lap. He pulled the matchstick from his mouth and tossed it into a nearby trash bin, replacing it with another from the box he kept in his breast pocket. Since you're such a wellspring of wisdom, I said, do you have any advice? Yeah, he said. Don't sign up for the army, hoping that it'll solve all your problems. He laughed to himself and stood from the chair. It'll teach you discipline, give you structure, but I'm not gonna promise it'll make you happy. Thanks, I guess. He looked down at me, the usual edge of his gaze dulled by the whiskey. You want something honest? Don't let it weigh on you. It's just static. Noise, Sonia. That's all. You gotta find a way to tune it out. Once you step up and take charge of your life, things will get better, not easier. It doesn't ever get easier, but you figure out how to carry that weight instead of struggling beneath it. Thanks, I said, meaning it this time. Alright, radio command and give them the message for the American company. Tell them what you will to get us more time. For now, this stays between us. The rest are on a need-to-know basis. Do you understand? Yes, sir. I want you to monitor the rest of the crew. See if any of them show symptoms of infection, confusion, disorientation, memory loss, unusual quietness. That last should be rather easy to spot with some of them. Once we're in the clear, we'll divulge what we know and head out to take care of this. I rose from my seat. To be safe, we should probably maintain a distance from each other, prepare our own meals, and refrain from sharing drinks. I see where you're coming from, but if we do that, they'll only get more suspicious. We need to be careful about how we proceed. Last thing we want is to incite panic. Not telling them is going to do just that. But if we tell them, there's no saying how they might react. One way or the other, it'll be a long night. Let them remain blissfully ignorant for the time being. That way, they don't feel pressure to act a certain way. Should make observing them a lot easier. While I couldn't necessarily agree with the commander's methods, it wasn't my place to further question him or negate any of his decisions. There was a reason he'd been put in charge, and love it or hate it, I had my orders. I trust you can take it from here then? He asked. I'll do what I can, sir. At the same time, I had to wonder how close the commander had gotten to the foreigner, whether he'd been within its contamination radius. Hell, I had to wonder the same about myself. There was no saying how expansive its reach went. If Emma's lock was any indication, it could instigate hallucinations and delusions from miles away, could distort a person's reality even while buried beneath a thick layer of ice and snow. There just wasn't enough data present to fully comprehend its abilities, wasn't enough to understand the risks or dangers it posed. I exited the commander's quarters and walked down the hall to the common room where the others were in the midst of a game of pool. It was Benny against Javier, while Ariana fingered through the pages of the Bible. I didn't know how much good it would do her, but if it gave her some kind of solace, I wasn't going to interfere. As I entered the room, they stopped what they were doing and looked at me, their eyes wide, faces absent of emotion. Seconds passed, them staring at me and me staring at them. I exhaled and said, "Don't let me stop you. Looks like Benny's got you against the ropes again." Javier snorted. "He wishes." Then he sunk one of the striped balls in the corner pocket and celebrated with a beer. "I'm a dead-eye way, never miss a shot." "You've scratched almost 6 times now," Ariana muttered beneath her breath, returning to her scriptures. "If you can keep that up," Benny said to Javier, "I might actually have to try for once." "I see you sweating over there, Benji," he replied. "You can't keep the cue straight." Benny chucked his stick and mumbled beneath his breath, "Keep talking, see what happens." He lifted his hand to his tousled hair, trying to comb the thick locks out of his eyes to no avail. Benny had what we called permanent bat head, his shaggy beard giving him the appearance of a stereotypical lumberjack. "I'm gonna send you home running to mommy," Javier joked. At this, Benny clenched his jaw. "Just take your next shot already." And like that, they had forgotten all about me. That was one fire put out, and I had a feeling that the remainder of my night would be spent performing the same conversational maneuver to make sure no others would spring up, affecting a level of nonchalance to keep everyone else pacified and unsuspecting, at least until the commander deemed it safe enough to tell them. A few seconds later, Ludwig came out from the kitchen with a bowl of dip and a couple bags of chips. There was talk about getting dinner ready soon, but this small treat was meant to tide us over until then. Again, I abstained. He set the bowl on the table and opened the chips. The others broke from their game and joined them. I watched silently as they passed the chips around, all digging into the dip without pause. Then, Benny started pouring shots for everyone as a means of passing the time. Like I said, you had to make your own entertainment. "Sonya?" he asked. "I'm good," I said, stifling the scream lodged in my throat. I slipped past them and headed down the opposite hall into the radio room. I contacted our superiors and told them we would need more time to investigate since we were interrupted by the storm. They told me they would pass the message to the American company and respond later with any further updates or instructions. I thought about telling them the truth, about asking for reinforcements, but it dawned on me that the more people we involved, the chances of infection only increased. We had to isolate, at least until we knew more. After that, I went to my room and placed Emma's hard drive in the top shelf of my dresser. I don't know why, but I liked the idea of having it close, as if it meant something for me to have it, as if it somehow gave me importance. For the rest of the night, the others alternated between board games and rounds of pool. They drank and chatted, laughed on occasion. Supper never came. Instead, they snacked on chips and other prepackaged foods, which was preferable in given circumstances. To them, it was just any other weekend, a grace period between holidays where the expectation for work was relatively low. Not that we were able to accomplish much without the other half of our team. At some point, Ludwig turned to me and asked, "What was the deal earlier with that stuff at the American base?" I searched for a plausible answer, glad Ariana hadn't told them about the possibility of contamination. Maybe it had slipped her mind, or maybe she didn't want to be the brunt of their questions. Either way, it made it easier for me to fabricate a story from scratch than try to mold one from any details she might have given them. I found some entry locks from one of the cabins," I explained, trying to conceive something plausible. They noted a possible biohazard in the area. "What kind of biohazard?" They didn't specify, but I thought it might pose a danger if we stuck around. Probably better to just leave it alone, let the American company deal with it instead. "Was it flammable or something?" Javier asked, leaning across the pool table to take his next shot. "Because we found some human remains. Looked like they'd been burned." "No, I don't believe so. From what I could gather, the analysts were trying to secure the area, and they encountered issues along the way." "Issues?" That guy was charred to a crisp. Before I could answer, Ludwig interjected with, "Wait a minute, what kind of biohazard are we talking about?" "I'm not exactly sure," I confessed. The records were vague. I think the analysts were still in the process of collecting samples and testing. Was it some kind of fungus? Javier asked. Do you think we'll be okay? I mean, we were all in the vicinity of it, right? It's unclear, I said. I talked it over with the commander. He's still trying to figure out our next steps, but I'm sure once he has an answer, he'll share it with the rest of us. Benny set his pool cue down on the table. Should I take a shower? You shower? Javier remarked. Since when? Calm down. I cut in before the situation could spiral any further. It was probably nothing. I overreacted earlier because I was afraid that we'd get in some kind of trouble for interfering with the Americans' research. The bureaucrats get really worked up about stuff like this, especially when it comes to new discoveries. Still, said Ludwig, we should have done more to preserve the scene. We left a body out there in the storm. I know, and I apologize. I wasn't thinking straight. I jumped the gun and the commander already gave me a stern talking to. We'll probably head out again tomorrow to clean up the mess and further assess the situation. I was met by a sea of dubious stares. If I were them, I wouldn't believe me either. Not completely, but I was just a mouthpiece. If they wanted answers, they'd have to take their concerns to the commander, and he wasn't always the most approachable person. Well, I have some tissue samples from the corpse, Ludwig said. I can perform a few tests and see what comes back. I would wait and see what the commander wants us to do. You know he's our superior, Javier said. Not God, right? I suppressed my irritation. I know, I'm just trying to be professional about this. Ludwig narrowed his eyes, a groove forming across his forehead. What are you not telling us? I'm telling you everything I know. I think you're full of shit. I can see it in your eyes. You are acting strange tonight. You're more than welcome to ask the commander yourself. What is the point? He won't tell us anything. You have always been his favorite, his proud little puppy dog. My cheeks flushed, and I could feel the heat radiating from my face. Maybe I'm just better at following orders. Better at not asking questions, maybe, Javier offered in a casual manner. Hey, let's all take a second to breathe, Benny suggested. If there was a problem, the commander would tell us himself. Plus, we were all wearing insulated gear. That does not help against airborne pathogens, Ludwig countered. If there was a biohazard, we would most likely have been exposed. We were wearing face masks though. Balaclavas are not medical grade. They're meant to protect you against the cold, not viruses. Benny, teetering between buzzed and intoxicated, raised his hands in surrender and mumbled a fake apology. Then he tapped the table with his hand to get Javier's attention. You gonna take your turn or what? Tentatively, Javier angled the stick and rammed the cue ball. There was a loud crack as the other balls bounced against each other, rebounding off the inner lip of the table. They came to a gradual standstill, the room falling silent in response. Ludwig looked me up and down. We're infected with something, aren't we? No, I lied. I don't think so. What is it? I don't know. Bullshit. You think I haven't noticed the way you've been watching us? What did the commander put you up to? Nothing. Don't lie to me, Sonia. His expression was taut and cold as steel. What aren't you telling us? A moment of silence passed as I racked my brain for a response. He stepped forward. What is going on? I reached for the rifle that wasn't there, the one that I had locked up in the armory with the rest of the firearms. It was an instinctual reaction, one I'd grown quite accustomed to during those excursions with my brother, where a snap of twigs from the forest could mean anything. Could be a bird taking to the sky, a rabbit running across the ground, or a grizzly bear about to invade our camp. And while I tried to play it off as if I was just stretching, Ludwig took notice. His face hardened. Behind him, Benny and Javier set their pool cues on the table and took a step back. Ariana quietly closed her book and placed it on the coffee table. She hunkered lower into her seat as if to take cover. Then, Ludwig barreled past, shouldering me aside as he darted down the northern hallway. Once I had regained my balance, I gave chase, catching up quickly and crashing into his side. He pounced off the wall and fell to the floor. Before I could further pursue, Javier was behind me, maneuvering his arms under mine, attempting to put me into a full Nelson. I swung my head back against his face. There was an audible crunch of his nose, and he yelled out in pain. His arms went slack around me, and I slipped free. By then, Ludwig had returned to his feet, stumbling down the hall towards the armory. I leapt onto his back, wrapping my legs around his waist and trying to secure my arms around his throat. We teetered from side to side, falling against the wall before collapsing to the ground. My head slammed against the floorboards, and my vision rippled like a stone on water. There was yelling and screaming, but I couldn't tell who or where it was coming from. Maybe it was just my imagination. I don't know. Before I could try to figure it out, I was already crawling across the floor after Ludwig. Just as I extended my hand to grab him, Javier had me by the ankle and started dragging me away. I began to flail and kick in response. My defense mechanisms not so different from those of a child in the midst of a tantrum. Benny came in to break us up, grabbing Javier by the collar of his shirt and pulling him off me. They wrestled against each other, awkwardly skittering around the hallway as neither could outright overpower the other despite Benny's larger frame. It seemed all that booze had dulled his senses. I turned away from them, watching Ludwig scramble to his feet again, his left foot dragged, injured from the previous skirmish. Climbing to my hands and knees, I pounced at him, hooking my arms around his legs. Thrown off balance, he dropped on top of me. My teeth came together hard, clamping down against the inside of my cheek. The distinct, metallic tinge of blood washed over my tongue. "What are you hiding?" Ludwig yelled, trying to push me away. "What aren't you telling us?" "I already told you everything I know," I returned, a horrible lie said with more conviction than I felt. "Bullshit!" There was a sharp click, and everything came to a standstill. Slowly, I raised my head, staring down the barrel of the commander's revolver. It drifted towards Ludwig, then rose to face Benny, before setting its sights on Javier. "Something we need to discuss?" the commander asked, gesturing with his gun for us to stand up. Ludwig shoved me away and returned to his feet. I wiped the blood from my lips, and with Benny's help, stood. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw Javier sporting a fresh bruise on his cheek, and he refused to meet my gaze. "Who would like to go first?" Commander Kimball asked. Ludwig wasted no time at all. "What the hell is going on?" The commander frowned. "I need you to lower your voice and be a little more specific." Ludwig was successful in only one of these demands. "Sir, what did we find out there?" Even as I stared at the floor, I could feel the weight of the commander's eyes on me. I had failed to uphold my orders. Whether this was a subconscious blunder or a furtively intentional one remained a mystery to me. Either way, I won't lie and say I didn't experience some modicum of relief at no longer having to keep it a secret. "You wanna know?" the commander asked. "You really wanna know? Alright, fine." Sonia discovered a document in one of the Americans' cabins, Emma of Outpost Delta. This document detailed an unusual finding, a foreign entity. "A foreign entity?" Javier remarked. "Like an alien?" The commander grinned. "Something like that, yeah." "Bullshit," came Ludwig. I think that might have been a recent addition to his vocabulary, or maybe it was a new catchphrase. "What was it really?" The commander shrugged. "As far as we know, it's exactly that. This thing, whatever it is, has the ability to infect others, to manipulate their memories, incite hallucinations, and distort their thoughts. There isn't much else we know about it, honestly." The encounter, while disturbing, was brief, provoking more questions than supplying answers. He continued to tell them about everything we had read, how one of the analysts, Edward, wandered outside his cabin under the belief that there was someone else stranded in a snowstorm, how he happened upon the entity and was saved by his fellow employee Emma. They proceeded to have a conversation that the commander suspected was the entity trying to ascertain the nature of humanity. The motivation behind this was still vague, but the commander believed the entity was attempting to assimilate, that it either was hoping to mimic our behaviors, or at the very least, gather an understanding of our species. He noted that its approach focused more on emotions and thought patterns as opposed to defense mechanisms and warfare procedures. It showed little to no interest in our technological advancements, which in the commander's mind meant the entity was either extremely naive in nature or completely unconcerned with humanity's abilities to repel its presence. Then, he told them how Edward, infected by the entity, went back to the outskirts to take the creature up, that he tried to free it from the ice but was stopped by Emma. This resulted in the deaths of the American skeleton crew aside from Emma, who took her own life after believing she too had fallen victim to the entity's influence, a last-ditch effort to contain it. "We don't know where it came from," the commander said. "We don't know why it's here, and we don't know what it planned to do if it successfully broke out of the ice. What we do know is that it's dangerous, has parasitic tendencies, and will stop at nothing to gain its freedom. While it behaves in a relatively peaceful manner at first, if it at all feels provoked or in danger, it becomes hostile in ways you cannot begin to imagine. Benny scoffed. "You're fucking serious, aren't you?" "Afraid so," the commander replied. "We didn't tell you because you think one of us might have been infected," Ludwig finished. Begrudgingly, he nodded. "Maybe more than one." "Did you tell the American company about this?" Javier asked. "I mean, shouldn't they know? It's technically their problem, right?" "It was their problem, yes," the commander agreed. "But now, this issue has fallen into our laps." He lowered his revolver, holstering it. "I had Sonya radio command, requesting we be given more time to investigate the American camp. Chances are slim that they'll grant us any extra time. So tomorrow morning, we'll ride back out there and try to destroy the entity before the Americans can send a rescue team." "Destroy it?" Benny asked. "How the hell are we supposed to do that?" "You're the demolition expert." "I mean, I could rig up a couple of homemade firebombs or something, but we'd need to put in a request for dynamite or thermal charges. Not that command would just give us any." Ludwig exhaled laboriously, his hands smothering his face in frustration. "You should have told us. I collected tissue samples from the infected employee. Am I infected now?" The commander was calm when he said, "It's a distinct possibility. Any of us could be infected. Maybe all of us." "Well, how do we know? What are the symptoms?" "Confusion, memory loss, disorientation, perhaps fatigue. When Edward was infected, he showed an ignorance to weather and temperature, as well as an enhanced immune system. There was also a sense of detachment from his emotions and memories. Emma experienced a similar phenomenon near the end. There was an emphasis on her failing cognition, that she was losing track of time, and she could feel the entity manipulating her thoughts." Benny lifted his head and looked around. "Does anyone feel that now?" The commander laughed. "I appreciate the effort, Ben, but the entity exhibits cautious behavior about outing itself. Whether Edward knew he was infected or not is ambiguous, and if he did know, he made no mention of it to Emma." "You're forgetting something, Commander," Ludwig said. "Those aren't exactly uncommon symptoms. Cold temperatures, lack of daylight, isolation from humanity. It is only natural that we might develop mental fatigue or depression or lack of concentration in our given environment." I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to do, or if there even was anything I could do to help. The situation felt helpless. We were just waiting to see what would happen, hoping for the best, but ultimately preparing for the worst. And as this sense of dread unfolded between us, we all looked around at one another, realizing just how dire our situation actually was. "What about the biological process?" Ludwig asked optimistically. "When the host is infected, is the entity taking control of the mind, or is it inserting its own cells?" The commander held up a hand to silence him. "We don't know. When the others confronted Edward, his body began to transform, but it's not clear whether those were his own cells or the entities. Maybe it was a mixture of both. By the time the American employees discovered the entity, it was too late. They didn't have a chance to perform tests or draw any conclusions. They were already dead." "Shouldn't we do something?" Javier asked. "I mean, that thing is out there." "We can't go out in a storm like this," I said. "Right now, as far as we know, it's still buried beneath a thick layer of ice and snow. The storm will be gone by tomorrow morning. That'll be the first chance we have to take action." "Fuck the storm. I say we go out there now and kill it. Actually, screw that. Why don't we just radio the American company and tell them to deal with it? Call command and get us a ride out of here." "That's not a bad idea," Ludwig commented. "If it was the American employees that first discovered this entity, then it should be their responsibility to handle it, no?" I glanced at the commander, recognizing the exhaustion on his face, the slight hum of intoxication in his eyes. He seemed more inclined to fall asleep than to answer any more questions. "We didn't plan on telling the American company," I admitted. "And for the time being, we weren't going to tell command either. It's too dangerous for anyone else to get involved. We need to contain the entity's reach, try to keep the situation isolated from the rest of society." Ludwig threw up his hands. "This is bullshit." "Quite," the commander replied. "But I'm open to suggestions." At that, the room was silent again. We looked around at each other, uncertain and afraid. We were expecting to encounter difficulties out here, but this wasn't something anyone could prepare us for. "It's late," the commander finally said. "Why don't we call it a night? return to our quarters, try to get some sleep, and finish this in the morning. How the hell are we supposed to sleep after this? Javier asked. With your doors locked, I suggested. The commander nodded agreeingly. Then he went to the end of the hall and removed the armory key from the hook on the wall. I'll keep this with me. If anyone has a problem with that, let me know. His hands came down to rest on the grip of his revolver. I'm sure we can figure something out. Once this is done with, Ludwig said, I'm out of here. I'll make sure command hears about this. That's just fine by me, but nobody leaves until we're finished here. After that, we retired to our rooms. No one bothered cleaning up the lounge. It seemed pointless to do so, not to mention we had all become conscious of each other, the gaps between us steadily growing. Ahead of me, I watched Javier and Ludwig whispering amongst themselves. I tried to hear what they were saying, but I couldn't make out their voices over the sound of shuffling feet and creaking floorboards. So instead, I looked over at Benny to see if he had anything to say, but he ignored me. Ariana was quiet too. She retrieved her Bible from the coffee table and stared at her feet as she walked past me. You okay? I asked her. She shrugged. Are any of us? Then she slipped inside her room and closed the door behind her. The others did the same. I watched as their doors slammed shut, listened as the locks clicked into place. I turned around and looked across the room to the commander. He just waved before heading into his office. Once I was inside my room, I closed the door and locked it. That's when the tears came. I don't know if it was in response to the minor injuries I suffered during the scuffle, or as a result of the situation as a whole. Either way, I stepped into the shower, turned it on, and sobbed beneath the cascade of hot water. I scrubbed at my skin relentlessly until it was a bright shade of red. I kept telling myself that I wasn't infected, that none of us were. Kept trying to recall memories from before the expedition as if that would somehow prove anything. It didn't help. It didn't make me feel any safer. I wondered what my brother would do, how he would have reacted. Knowing him though, he probably would have split off from the pack, would have radioed command for reinforcements or headed into the storm for the American outpost. Hard to say. He was mercurial in nature, did whatever he thought would guarantee his survival, adapted well to his environment. At that moment, I wished I could talk to him, that I could have talked to any of my family members, but I severed that connection when I came out here, left everything and everyone behind with this notion that maybe I could find myself in isolation, that for once I could figure out who I was and what I wanted from life. Maybe if I abandoned the system, took a step back, it would all become clear to me. Instead, I traded one routine for another, exchanged the bustle of the city for wintry storms, a suit and cubicle for a perka and cabin, a boss for a commander, management for command. I started laughing then, beneath the shower head. Clarity strikes you at the strangest times. It dawned on me that I never was swimming against the tide. I was just struggling to flow with it. My inability to conform was never a matter of resistance or rebellion. I don't think I've ever been sophisticated enough for something like that. Really, it was incompetence with a fair dose of apathy. Stepping out of the shower, I grabbed a pair of pajamas from the dresser, but I didn't see the point. There was no way I would be able to fall asleep. So I got dressed in a pair of jeans and a gray sweatshirt and climbed into bed, sitting with my back against the wall. Command provided us with a catalog of old movies, but I wasn't in the mood to watch anything. I just sat there in the dark, staring at my reflection in the TV's black screen. An hour passed, maybe 2. I got out of bed and crossed the room, retrieving the hard drive from the dresser. I connected it to my rig and sat at the computer, scrolling through Emma's files. There was a series of reports and observations about developments in Antarctica's recent weather conditions. Compared to our final document, they seemed bland and boring, meaningless words typed by a drone. I wondered if maybe that last entry was her way of trying to be creative, as if maybe it offered some form of release in those final moments before death, a way for her essence to persist even after she was gone. After that, I began to wonder about her, what she was like, what she used to do before coming to this tundra. But I already had my answer. Anyone that agreed to work out here was either desperate or lost. This wasn't the kind of job you took if things were going swimmingly for you back home. You were here for the paycheck, or to get away. A vacation without the sunny skies and endless beaches. a means of respite from the tumultuous whirlwind of life. I opened up a folder labeled Music and plugged a pair of headphones into the speakers. She had a small assortment of random songs, probably her favorites. If my experience was any indication, you weren't allowed to bring many personal effects when relocating. The bare necessities, possessions you couldn't live without. The rest was supposedly supplied by our companies. If you really needed something that wasn't already available, you were meant to put in a request with your supervisor. But I didn't bring anything. No movies, no books, no music. Just the clothes on my back. You're forced into minimalism when there isn't anything you deem worthwhile, sentimentally or monetarily. Sitting there listening to her music, I stared out the window and watched the storm. There wasn't much to watch. An endless ocean of darkness interspersed by misty screens of snow. A soft howl as the wind bombarded the compound, glass rattling in its frame. It was peaceful, in spite of everything. But that peace was fake, a superficial fabrication of my mind. If I stepped outside, the storm wouldn't hesitate to swallow me whole, to bury me beneath the ground. Not out of hostility or malevolence, just a natural occurrence. I wondered what Edward thought when he saw someone out there. Maybe he didn't think anything. Maybe his instincts just told him to go out there and save them, despite the fact that it would most likely result in his death. Would I have done the same? No, probably not. I would have radioed command for instructions or asked my superiors. Would have waited for my orders. I've always been quick to admit defeat. Outside, there was a lull in the storm. The winds momentarily subsided, and for the first time in a long time, I could see the night sky, an expansive stretch of black littered with tiny white stars, a vortex awashed by faint streaks of green and purple vapors, vibrant and beautiful. As I listened to Emma's music, the Kern song posed a question. And will we wither like skin, or will we age like wine? Just like that, the storm returned. The wind screamed against the base, clawing at the exterior with fingernails of solid ice, pelting the window with small bits of hail. I was inside, isolated from the storm, but still, I could feel the cold burning against my flesh. I paused the playlist and removed my headphones, intending to grab a blanket from the bed. But then, there was a banging from outside the room. I held my breath and waited. It came again. A sharp snap to disrupt the silence. Only this time, it was accompanied by a yell, quickly followed by another gunshot. I leapt from the chair and stumbled through the dark. With my hand on the doorknob, I inhaled and exhaled. There was another wave of gunshots. Before I could convince myself otherwise, I unlocked the door and ripped it open, peering down the hallway. The common room lights were off, but the darkness was peppered by the bright spark of a muzzle flash. The smoky sting of gunpowder entered my nostrils. Bullets whistled back and forth, cracking as they found their home in the walls and floors, splintering wooden panels and sending dust into the air. Stepping out from my quarters, I dropped low to the ground, awkwardly crawling across the floor. A hand seized my shoulder, and I turned, ready to start swinging. But it was just Ariana, her eyes wide with fear, pupils dilated into tiny pinpricks. "Don't," she whispered. "It's too dangerous." She clutched her copy of the Bible to her chest as if it might save her, an anchor to keep her steady. I carefully removed her hand from my shoulder and guided her into my room. "Stay here." "Stop," she said. "It's not your fight." She might have been right about that, but it didn't matter. I went anyway, sneaking down the hall, flush with the wall like a shadow. I snaked around the corner, using the dinner table and couch as cover, while I headed towards the opposite end of the base. Someone rose from behind the pool table and fired a shotgun blast down the north hallway. Wood splintered and flew through the air. Someone else, the commander, leaned out from his office and returned fire with his revolver. I continued through the room, recoiling at every gunshot, reminding myself that if I was still breathing, then the shot wasn't directed at me. And if it was, then the shooter had piss-poor aim. Eventually, I reached the other hallway. There was someone else across from me, sitting with their back against the wall, one hand pressed against their shoulder, the other playing limp at their side. The shotgun fired, illuminating the room for a moment. I realized it was Javier slumped on the floor, half his body damp with blood, splatters of red across his face. We made eye contact, but I'm not really sure he actually saw me. If he did, then his brain hadn't processed it yet. "Commander!" I yelled down the hall. The person behind the pool table rose again. In the dark, I saw the silhouette of their shotgun swing in my direction. Bullets flew from the north hall, forcing the shotgunner back behind cover. "Commander!" I yelled again. I was answered by the sound of boots against the floor. There was a metallic twang, and moments later, my rifle came sliding down the hall. I snatched it up and took refuge behind an armchair. Seconds later, the shotgun fired, and the chair recoiled against me. Little fluffs of stuffing scattered into the air like flecks of snow. I grasped the rifle's length, the metal shivering in my hands. The commander returned fire, and I almost dropped my weapon. There was a click and hiss, and when the shooter behind the pool table rose again, they held the flame in their right hand. For a brief moment, the profile of their face was aglow by the fire. It was Ludwig, his right side bathed in dancing shades of orange and red, while the other was cast in shadows. He threw the flames across the room. I watched as a bottle of vodka, filled with an assortment of chemicals that gave the substance an iridescent appearance, flew down the hall, glass shattering on impact. There was a soft whoosh as it combusted. A faint shimmer of light pulled from the hallway, slowly growing as the seconds ticked by. I stood, the rifle's stock against my shoulder, and pulled the trigger. The muzzle flashed, bright and blinding. The weapon jerked in my hands, but fear kept my grip firm. Ludwig recoiled against the bullet, blood spitting across the wall behind him. He howled in pain and dropped out of sight. There were a series of gunshots from behind. Bullets whizzed around me, one grazing the side of my head. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor, desperately repositioning myself around the other side of the chair while assessing the damages. "You're still breathing," I told myself. "You're still alive." Poking my head out from behind the chair, I saw Javier writhing on the ground. His good arm was raised. The pistol in his hand pointed in my direction. The gun clicked as his finger incessantly pulled at the trigger. The slide refused to move, locked in the rearward position. Again, we made eye contact. This time, I knew he'd seen me. He ejected an empty magazine from his pistol. In response, I pulled back on the bolt handle of my rifle, discharging the spent round, and slid it into place to load another. Meanwhile, he fumbled with a new magazine, struggling against the blood soaking his palm. His movements were partnered with soft grunts of pain, his frustration becoming a growl in his throat. "Don't," I whispered to him, but he couldn't hear me. "Just put it down, Javi." But he refused. In the end, I shot him in the head before he could load the second magazine. Then, I just sat there, waiting for... Honestly, I don't know what I was waiting for. Something. Anything. Nothing. The commander appeared from the north hall, stooped low on hesitant feet. He looked to his left first, assessing Javier's current state. Then he turned towards me. "You know that saying about your life flashing before your eyes? As Ludwig might say, it's bullshit. At least, in my experience, it was. I didn't see my friends and family, didn't get hit by a wave of beautiful memories and wonderful dreams. Instead, I saw the commander staring at me, trying to decide if I was a friend or foe, trying to decide whether I deserved one of his bullets. My heart pounded like a kick drum. There was a searing hot pain streaming from the side of my head as blood trickled down into my left eye that I was hesitant about wiping away in fear of provoking the commander to respond. "You've been hit," he finally said, lowering his revolver. "So have you," I returned. There was a small tear in his shirt from where the bullet entered. Blood seeped from the hole and soaked the area around it, thick and dark. I couldn't imagine what the exit would look like, but if the hunting trips with my brother had taught me anything, it wouldn't be a pretty sight. He laughed weakly. Not the first time, but maybe the last, I thought. Behind him, a wall of flames crept across the walls. I pulled myself up from the floor and set my rifle on the chair. Then I started for the south hall, trying to wipe the blood from my face and yelling for fire extinguishers. "On it!" came Benny's voice. "Ariana, grab the one out of your quarters." I stopped in the middle of the room, looking at the pool table. Hesitantly, I approached. Rounding the table, met by the sight of Ludwig lying on the ground, his hand around his throat to staunch the bleeding. He parted his lips to speak, but he couldn't get any words out through the blood. It was just an incomprehensible gurgle, like bubbling tar. But through the nonsense, I heard him say, "Take me home." His other hand inched towards the shotgun next to him. In that condition, I don't think he would have been able to aim it, much less lift it. But still, the commander came up behind me and shot him in the head. Ludwig would never go home, would never see his family or friends or anything ever again. It dawned on me that maybe none of us would. The commander exhaled, lowering his revolver to his side. He looked at me as if to say something, but instead, he shook his head. "Commander?" I asked. "Made a proper mess of things, haven't I?" He handed me his revolver and reached into his breast pocket, removing the box of matches. Taking one out of the box, he placed it between his lips and stuffed the box into my other hand. "We're all infected. All of us." He nodded again, agreeing with his assessment. "Burn the bodies. Burn everything. Leave nothing." Then, he turned and started back down the north hall, walking towards the raging flames. I called after him, but he didn't want to hear me. From behind, Benny and Ariana appeared on either side. They froze in place, neither sure how to react or what to say. They were as shocked as me. At the maw of the hallway, Commander Kimball looked over his shoulder at us and smiled. "I trust you can take it from here then," he said. And with that, he retreated into the fire, submerged by the flames within a matter of seconds. There were no screams, no cries, no pleas, no sound at all other than the collective crackle of burning wood as the inferno spread across the walls and floors, slowly consuming the base with no intent to stop, enveloping his body and turning it to ash and smoke and charred bones. Benny stepped forward, but I put my arm out to stop him. We waited a few more moments, letting the fire do its job. Then, I lowered my arm and nodded. They started across the room. Benny aimed the extinguisher's hose and sprayed the flames with a frothy white mixture to smother the fire. Meanwhile, Ariana's hands fumbled with the release lever, squeezing to no avail. Sticking the matchbox into my pocket and the revolver into my waistband, I came up beside her and took the fire extinguisher. Little by little, we suffocated the flames until we were once again stranded in darkness. Benny exhaled and ran a hand through his tangle of messy hair. "What the fuck?" "Put on your gear and get the keys to the shed," I told him, handing the fire extinguisher back to Ariana. "Open up the windows and make sure the ventilation is on to clear out the smoke before it kills us." I went into the locker room, gathered my coat and boots and snow pants. Once I was dressed, I went into the medical bay and grabbed the tissue samples collected from Edward's corpse, placing them in my breast pocket. While I was there, I rinsed the blood from my wound and disinfected it, biting back the urge to scream against the caustic sting. I opened a package of bandages and wrapped them around my head. Then I met Benny at the entrance. We ventured out into the storm, sticking close to the building as a wall of snow swirled around us. From inside the shed, we retrieved a few cans of gas and a bundle of flares. We made a small pool of gasoline a few feet from the base and went back inside to retrieve the bodies. Ariana was still standing where we had left her, gazing into the burned hallway with vacant eyes. I told her to get her gear on and bring the extinguisher outside. She didn't move, so I grabbed her by the shoulder and squeezed. This time, she turned towards me. "You killed them." "Get dressed," I said. "Meet us outside and bring the extinguisher." Benny and I silently carried Javier out the main entrance and dropped his body at a clearing about 15 feet from the building. The gasoline had dissolved the snow into a slushy mixture. "This is too much," Benny remarked, wiping dripping down his flushed face. "We're in way over our heads." "I know," I said, "but we don't have much of a choice." We went back inside. This time, Ariana was waiting for us, dressed in her gear and ready. Together, Benny and I heaved Ludwig off the floor and shimmied through the room, carrying him outside to lay beside Javier. All around us, the wind screamed like a banshee in the night. While the snow and ice still came at a rapid pace, it seemed the storm was dying down some, moving on. Standing before the two bodies, I asked, "Would anyone like to say anything?" Ariana considered this, but ultimately, she shook her head in refusal. Aside from Ludwig, she was probably the most qualified person of our group, a master's degree in this and a doctorate in that. I can't remember the specifics because she didn't like to talk about university that much. I think it irritated her that we all wound up in the same place despite the paths that led us here. Some requiring extreme cost and effort, while others simply signed up for the position. I angled my head in Benny's direction, the question still present. "You weren't bad guys. You were just scared," he said, his voice low and somber. "I'm scared too, you know. We all are." I removed the cap from the flare, flipping it over and swiped the striker against the ignition. A bright orange flame hissed from the top, bathing us in its vibrant, flickering hues. The wind pulled at the flame, stealing away embers into the night. "You did what you thought was right," I said to the dead. "I guess that's the best any of us can ask for." Then I tossed the flare between the bodies. The flame spread across the gasoline and enveloped the bodies. I reached into my pocket, taking the tissue samples into the palm of my hand, and tossed those into the mix as well. We waited as long as we could before the flames threatened to get out of control. I nodded at Ariana. She lifted the hose and sprayed at the flames. Benny and I shoveled snow onto the fire with our boots. When all was said and done, charred corpses remained. "I'm going to pack my things," Ariana said, heading back inside. Benny and I dawdled, watching the snow gather over Javier and Ludwig, every minute adding a new layer to further bury them. "We're not getting out of this, are we?" Benny asked. "I don't know," I confessed. "Probably not." For some reason, he laughed. "I should have stayed in demolition. At least it was fun." "If you liked it, then why did you come out here?" "This paid better. It let me travel, change of scenery and all that, you know." I was willing to accept this response, but then his expression became hauntingly severe. "Actually, I was with this girl, Gosaya. We'd been together since our 20s, the closest thing I had to family after my mom. One day," he continued with no indication of stopping, "she told me she was pregnant, and I didn't really know what else to do. I just thought of my own father and how that all turned out. Before I knew it, I had my bags packed. I went as far away as I could, hoping that maybe I'd be able to forget. But since I got here, it's the only thing I can think about." I glanced out at the horizon, watching the storm clouds lazily drift across the early morning sky. "Have you talked to her since?" "No, not really," he admitted. "I've written a couple of letters, but I never sent them. Too much time has passed, and nothing I say will make it right. Nothing I do can fix it." This conversation was helping him, distracting him from the death around us. I was willing to indulge it because, in a way, it was helping me forget too, keeping the panic at bay. But regardless, it was still there, festering inside my heart, setting any semblance of calm ablaze. "If you saw her again, what would you say?" He stared at the skeletal remains. "Honestly, I don't have a clue. Sometimes, I just want to scream. At myself, at the world, at my dad. And other times, I want to hug her, to feel her close to me again." "You still love her?" "I never stopped loving her. I just didn't really trust myself." I couldn't tell if it was sweat or tears streaking down his cheeks, but I didn't make any mention of it. "We used to talk on the phone for hours on end," he recalled. "We did that dumb thing young couples do, where neither wants to hang up first. Usually, it was her though that hung up, and afterwards, I would just sit there lying in bed, looking at the phone, waiting for her to call. Even now, I'm still just waiting. I don't know why she would reach out, but I keep hoping that she does." He looked over at me. "Does that make me pathetic?" "I think it just makes you human." He scoffed. "Some human I am, huh? Maybe I deserve to be here, to die here." Heading back inside, we stopped in the common room to catch our breath. None of us knew what to say to each other. We weren't necessarily friends, but we'd known each other for the last year, had spent almost every day with one another. In a situation like that, there really isn't anything you can say. "What now?" Benny asked. "We should radio command for extraction," I said. "It'll take them a little while to get a helicopter out here. That should give us more than enough time to destroy this thing and end this." "I thought you said the less people." "I know, but with the current status of the base, we won't survive out here. If we destroy it, that should eliminate any risk of further infection. Of course, that was assuming none of us were already infected. According to the commander, we all were. At least, he thought we were. But what if none of us had been infected? What if that was just in our heads? Grab anything you think we'll need, I told him. I'll contact headquarters, and then we'll leave. I went to my personal quarters to grab Emma's hard drive. It didn't even belong to me, but at the same time, it was all I had. I stuffed it into a backpack along with some extra clothes, a flashlight, and some rations from the pantry. Then I went into the communications room only to find the radio system had been smashed to pieces. There were bits of plastic scattered across the floor and colored wires protruding from several devices. If Javier were still around, we might have been able to salvage the situation. But Benny was the demolition expert and Ariana was our navigator. None of us could fix something like this. I paused in the doorway, wondering when it had been destroyed and by who. Ludwig and Javier wanted to go home. It didn't make sense for either one of them to do it. Maybe the commander, but this seemed like an irrational course of action for him to have taken. Not that he was necessarily thinking rationally before his untimely death. Returning to the common room, Benny and Ariana turned to look at me. Both were overcome by the same worn visage of fatigue exacerbated by stress and worry. I'm sure I didn't appear any better. What did they say? Benny asked. He was armed with Ludwig's stolen shotgun. His personal pack was positioned beside the door, next to 2 cans of gasoline. Are they gonna send a chopper out? I exhaled softly. The radio was destroyed. I couldn't reach them. Ariana gasped and clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle her sobs. Tears pooled in her eyes, threatening to streak down her face. Next to her, Benny groaned and kicked at the floor. Son of a bitch, how bad is it? Bad, I said. But maybe we can use one of the broadcast stations at the American Outpost. We're heading that direction anyway. That's a 30-mile trek south, Ariana said. Do you really think we can make it in the storm? I glanced outside to assess the weather. Storm is calming down some. We should be able to. The words caught in my throat. I turned to Benny and frowned. What's wrong? He asked. The gears in my mind clicked. Dread yanked on my heartstrings. Ariana? What's your last name? She perked up and removed her hand from her mouth. What? Your last name. What is it? I don't see how that. What does that have anything? What's your last name? What town are you from? What university did you attend? She stammered. I don't. The American Outpost is north, I said clinically despite the panic roaring inside. You would have known that. Before she could respond, not that she would have, I removed the commander's revolver from my waistband and fired the last 3 bullets into her chest. She fell backwards onto the floor and began convulsing. I yelled for Benny to douse her in gasoline. He tossed his shotgun onto the pool table and retrieved one of the canisters. His gloved hands fumbled with the cap. There was a sharp crack as Ariana's body split open vertically. Jagged bone fragments tore through her clothes, pulling them away to reveal a nest of writhing black tendrils barbed with thorn-like protrusions. A dark mass spilled from her head, slowly slithering around her body. It was interwoven with sinuous, fiery threads that pulsated like an exposed electrical current. Benny, come on! I'm trying, damn it! Ariana's body bounced off the floor. There was a ferocious cracking of bones as her limbs snapped backwards like the spindly legs of a spider. Her head hung limp at the neck, dangling around with eyes rolled up into her skull. Benny unscrewed the gas cap and reeled his arm back as if to douse her, but he froze mid-swing. There was a faint gasp from his open mouth. You've gotta be fucking kidding me. One of the black tendrils lashed out, spearing him through the chest and out the other side. It unfurled, hooking itself deep into Benny's backside before reeling him in. The gas can fell from his hands, skittering across the floor towards me. I moved for it, but stopped short and dove behind the pool table for cover as a tendril propelled towards me, impaling the wall behind me instead. Between the legs of the pool table, I watched as the black mass rolled across Benny, pouring into his open mouth and down his throat, gagging his screams. His legs thrashed incessantly, boots scuffing the floorboards. Desperately, he tried to peel the black mass away, but his fingers glided right through it like trying to grab water. Another tendril whipped in my direction, slashing the pool table in half. The balls fell to the floor, clacking against the wooden boards as they scattered in every direction. I scampered across the room, seizing Ludwig's shotgun and blasting the next tendril that came flying at me. It, like any other membrane or hunk of meat, splintered into pieces and fell limp against the ground. Pumping the forend, I discharged the depleted shell and lifted the barrel, aligning the sights with the center of Ariana's body. I pulled the trigger. The blast sent her reeling into the wall. A mixture of black and red splattered across the floor. For a brief moment, I wondered if I could save Benny, if I could somehow prise him from the mass. But his screams had been silent, and his body had fallen still. He was already gone. So I discarded the shotgun and grabbed the gas can. With a few clicks of the can, I splashed gasoline onto them and stepped back, ducking as one of the other tendrils swatted at my head. Reaching into my pocket, I removed the box of matches and picked one out. Then, I slid the red tip against the sandpaper side, igniting a small flickering flame, tossing it across the room. Ariana and Benny combusted. There was a long hollow screech from Ariana's gaping maw. The creature whipped its tendrils all around, stabbing at the walls and ceiling, puncturing the floorboards, trying and failing to kill me, before it inevitably died. As the seconds passed and the creature burned away, it realized the futility of its actions and instead gained a sense of self-preservation. It took off, running across the room on its twisted limbs, the sound of clicking bones trailing behind it. I watched in horror as it burst through the front door, diving outside into the storm. Taking up the shotgun, I went after it, stopping a moment to collect Benny's fire extinguisher along the way. Outside, the creature lay in the snow, its form becoming brittle, small slivers of ash peeling from its body into the wind. A part of it continued to crawl through the snow, weakly moaning as if trying to call out for help. This too proved a futile gesture. It burned to a husk and collapsed, the fire sprawling from its back, slowly bending against the breeze. Then, it was just me and the wind. Flecks of snow drifted through the air, landing on Ariana and Benny and Ludwig and Javier, coalescing into powdery mounds that would freeze over by the night, if not sooner. I extinguished what fire remained on Ariana and retreated inside. With the door busted from the hinges and in pieces, there was little hope to contain the heat or ward off the cold. It was only a matter of time before the compound submitted to the weather. I moved fast through the compound, collecting my gear and supplies by the front door. I didn't bother trying to put out the small trail of flames persisting in the common room. They'd either grow and consume the base, or they'd diminish against the wind. Either way, it didn't matter in the grand scheme of things, and I didn't have the time to care. Going through Benny's back, I found a number of granola bars and bottled water. There were also shotgun shells, flares, and a flare gun. I took what I could, stuffing it into my pack with my own things. The flare gun I set on a nearby end table, wanting to keep it close to signal the rescue team after I called for them. Then, I started going through Ariana's stuff. But unsurprisingly, she hadn't packed anything other than her Bible. Why destroy the radio? I thought. What do you get out of it? Retrieving my rifle, I slung it over one shoulder and my pack over the other. I took one last look around the base, watching the accumulation of smoke and flames rise. This was it. The last time I would see the base. The last time I would ever set foot in here. The feeling was both euphoria and dread, like the last day of school, knowing you'll be done with the assignments and teacher and other students, but also having no clue as to what the future might hold for you, if it'll hold anything at all. I turned for the door. But there was something else already on its way inside. It stood almost 8 feet tall, stooped against the ceiling. It had a gaunt frame and thin limbs, walking bipedal, but from its clumsy movements, this seemed a recent alteration that it was still adjusting to. While the entity was foreign in nature, its body was slowly shifting, taking on the appearance of a human, protruding ribs and squared shoulders, mottled blue flesh turning a tan peach color. Its feet, curved like a bird's heel, began to flatten. Even its head, originally a flat plate of what looked like bone with branch-shaped tendrils wrapped about it, was beginning to compress, donning a skeletal feature more akin to a human skull, save the additional attribute of horns sticking out from the top of its scalp. A jagged crown of sorts. It took an awkward step towards me. Instinctually, I took a step back. This intrigued the creature, causing it to lean closer, tilting its head as a scattering of black beady eyes glistened a fiery orange, little wisps emitting from them in a smoke-like fashion. As the creature continued to stalk towards me at a cautious, almost methodical pace, a black, viscous substance seeped from numerous tiny orifices across its body. They seemed harmless in nature, an organic secretion that showed no practical intent, but still, I was careful to keep my distance. The creature froze as I reached for my rifle, and as I removed it from my shoulder, it mimicked the gesture. I lifted the barrel and aimed at the head. It too shifted its body, holding an invisible gun with the sights set on me. I remembered Emma's report, the lengths she had gone to while combating the entity, both when it was inside her and her friend. Something told me a single bullet wouldn't suffice, that it would only shatter the entity's enchantment, provoke it to retaliate. Until I could think of a different plan, I needed to pacify the creature. So I began to lower my weapon, and in return, it did too. I set the rifle on the ground, watching as it discarded the non-existent gun as well. "Can you speak?" I asked. "Can you understand me?" Its body shifted with the lithe movements of a ballerina. Every motion, every gesture was careful and deliberate. The entity emitted a series of chirps that reverberated through the air, slowly tuning to a comprehensible form of English, a mimicry of several different voices that spoke as one. "Who am I to you?" it asked. Goosebumps prickled across my flesh. "You're nobody. Yet, I can be everybody." It tilted its head as if to inspect me. I was the one known as Edward. I was, for a time, Emma. I can be you. As if to further prove this, the entity's shape began to take on my appearance, my sloped shoulders, and my thin arms and my torso. I can be anybody. "No," I said. "Not really. It's just an imitation, a piss-poor carbon copy." I exhaled an unsteady breath. "You're just a parasite pretending to be human." "And you're not?" I didn't know what to say, but I didn't have to speak because it continued with, "I could bring peace to this species, every living organism united as one. It wouldn't be hard." Through manipulation, I countered, by taking control of our minds, inserting yourself into our thoughts and feelings. Peace, nonetheless. But in the process, we'd be forfeiting what makes us human. We'd just be a part of you, and you'd just be an imitation of us. Isn't that worth it? To stand united is better than to die alone. I guess that depends on who you ask. I am asking you. I didn't feel that I was an appropriate representation for all of humanity, but in that moment, it made me an ambassador of sorts for the species. Yet, this wasn't a discussion that would end with compromise. It was just a matter of time before one of us attacked, before one of us felt provoked to respond physically. Although I had to wonder, what was keeping the entity at bay? What was it waiting for? Then, I realized it wasn't necessarily waiting or planning. While intelligent, possibly far more intelligent than myself, it was still in the process of learning, of adapting to not only the situation, but its environment. It was still developing a level of comfort before taking action to further its cause. I was then left to wonder just how long before that comfort was achieved. Slowly, I reached out and grabbed the commander's revolver. The entity did the same, replicating my gesture and seizing the nearest duplicate it could find, Benny's flare gun. As I aimed the revolver's barrel at its chest, it aimed the flare gun at me. "If you were Edward, and you were Emma, and you were Ariana," I said, "then who are you now?" "Now," it said, "I am me, wholly, singularly me. I was there, in the ice. I was there, in the storm. But now, I am here. I have come to stand before you, the last connection to the outside world." It began to shrink in height. I am becoming Sonia. I am recognizing the fear in our eyes. I am recognizing the panic in our mind. I am recognizing the hopelessness of our situation. Although I do not understand this hopelessness, I do not fully understand us. I am afraid because I am uncertain, I responded, lowering the revolver. I feel panic because I do not know. I am hopeless because the future is unclear. Is that what scares us? It asked. The unknown? Is that what plagues our thoughts? Everyone is scared of the unknown, but what scares me is the suggestion. Suggestion? Conformity. Unity. Compliance. I rebuked. Harmony. It returned. A collective. A collective born involuntarily. Tiny bits of snow mashed together into a single ball. That's not peace. Not really. All flesh is grass, and of the comeliness thereof the flower of the field. It recited in a voice oddly redolent of Ariana's. Then, its tone lowered, deepening into that of an aged man. Humankind is and will always be unsuited to take charge of its own deliverance. You speak of humanity, but what do you know of it? I asked. Do you know what grass is? Have you ever seen a flower? It grew silent at this, once again tilting its head pensively. In response, I lifted my right hand, pressing the commander's revolver to my temple. The entity brought the barrel of the flare gun to its own skull. I shuffled sideways, walking across the room towards the door. The entity moved with me, meeting at the center before continuing for the other side. As I stood against the open doorway, the thrashing winds at my back, the entity positioned itself against the opposite wall, its frame outlined by the rising flames, silhouetted against the flickering lights. To suffer is to be human, it said in a soft, forlorn voice I didn't recognize. Without pain, it all becomes illusory. It's already an illusion, I said, a lie we keep telling ourselves over and over again because, without the lie, we have nothing, we are nothing. Nothing, it agreed. We are nothing. I pulled the trigger of the revolver. The hammer snapped, clicking against an empty cylinder. The entity pulled the trigger of the flare gun, wreathing its upper half in a bright, phosphorus flame. Shades of red and orange pulsated in the dark, sending shadows into a frenzy all around us. Within mere seconds, the entirety of the creature was smothered in fire, flesh peeling away as ash turned to smoke before they could fall to the floor. The black substance orbiting the entity sizzled and burned away. There were no screams or cries or pleas, no indication of fear or pain. If not for the fire or the wind, the room would lay in utter silence. I backed away from the entity, retreating outside into the storm. This time, the creature followed, slowly stalking towards me as its corporeal form smoldered. Every step dropped a smattering of flames on the floor. They fluttered and danced, linking together until it was just one burning inferno. A few steps later, the entity stood in the entryway, snowflakes melting before they could descend onto its shoulder. The wind ripped at the flames, small streaks sent writhing into the dark. I was trapped in the ice, buried beneath the snow. It said, I was lost in the storm. I walked through the cold. I've seen through the eyes of others and heard their thoughts weave with my own. It lifted its head and looked into the sky. I've sailed through the endless depths of space, witness to things you could not imagine. It whispered, comets streaking across the cosmos, collapsing stars shining in the dark, swirling nebula amongst an ocean of black, planets burning bright with surfaces of molten lava. It lowered its head to look at me. Now, no more than ashes in the wind. Falling to its knees, the entity gradually succumbed to the flames as they spread through the cabin, reaching the gas cans in the corner of the room and exploding, swallowing it whole and sending me into the dark. I landed in a mound of snow, my face hot and clothes sprinkled with fire. Instinctually, I began rolling around in the snow, extinguishing them before they could consume me too. Minutes passed before I found the strength to rise, stumbling to my feet, swaying with the breeze. One step after the other, I tracked the short distance to the shed and climbed into my snowcat. Starting the engine, I flicked on the headlights and windshield wipers before driving north. It felt like hours before I reached the other outpost. But in time, I was able to find Emma's cabin. Once I was there, I climbed out from the plow and made my way to the front door. Stepping inside and closing it behind me, I turned on her rig and adjusted the radio, calling out the command for emergency extraction, letting them know an infection had taken our camp and the base was no more. After confirming receival of my distress call, they agreed to send a helicopter to my given coordinates. Then, I stripped from my gear, took a shower, and returned to the system. While I waited for rescue, I connected Emma's hard drive to the computer and opened her music library, playing it from the first track. In fear of forgetting these moments, or having them become distorted by time, I created a new document and began to write. Now I'm sitting here with my finished story, waiting for the helicopter to arrive. Emma's playlist has come to an end. The storm has cleared. And for once, the world is quiet.